Thank you for watching. My name's Glenn Morgan, and this is We the Govern. I hope you had a good Thanksgiving weekend, and this is the first big video that we've put up since that weekend. And of course, inevitably, it just seems like there's always a bunch of stories that happened during the Thanksgiving weekend, and I'm going to cover 6 of them that you might have missed. So let's just jump right into it. These 6 Washington State stories that you probably missed this weekend because you were too busy doing more important things with your family. Now, just in case you haven't done so already, just a quick reminder, please hit the like and subscribe button down below if you haven't done so already. And if you think this video is worthwhile, or you think you have friends that want to see videos like this, please feel free to share them with others. It just helps get the word out more, and it helps annoy those in the political class who certainly don't want you to watch videos like this. So let's get back to these 6 Washington State stories that you probably missed this weekend. And of course, we're going to start out with number 6. And number 6, of course, goes back to our Washington State Public Records Act, which is actually a good act. However, we see state agencies that have decided that they're going to want to just start violating it willy-nilly. And this story really comes out of the Center Square for Washington. They did a video. I'll link to the stories down below. And it was also covered on Seattle Red. You saw it here, where basically Washington State Agency, of course, it appears to be destroying public records to dodge any kind of scrutiny that you might be directing at it. And I know those of you who have seen me deal with these issues before, who have been around the political process in Washington State, you're saying that you're shocked. Shocked. You can't believe a state agency would do that. Well, sure enough, it looks like they are. And in this case, the one that we're talking about is the Washington State, it's like this Department for Minority and Women's Contracts. It's a DEI operation, of course. It's run to basically help facilitate grifting operations through the state of Washington for politically preferred contracts to be directed to political donors, to the politicians. It's a typical grifting operation. And of course, the whole agency is just steeped in DEI culture and kickback schemes. They can't help themselves. That's just who they are, and that's just what's going on here. And unfortunately, we have a governor here who's got a long history of destroying public records himself, actively working to conceal the truth from the public. This is all he's ever done since he's been in office. So, of course, under his administration, things only get worse. I'm very happy that Center Square and any other media outlets are covering this because obviously when you look at the destruction of public records, it's guys like this that want to try to hide the truth from us, and we need to get the truth out there more widely. Moving on to story number 5. Story number 5 has to do with basically a Department of Justice news statement that came out of the Spokane office, and it's about a former Ellensburg doctor that was just recently indicted on 26 felony counts for falsifying and issuing commercial driver's licenses, as well as also, of course, prescriptions and other things. Now, the reason why this story is particularly interesting to me is that I've been doing a series of articles about the Washington State Department of Licensing and the thorough and comprehensive corruption that exists in that agency. And mainly I'd been focused on the voter roll issues, but recently some of the commercial driver's license scams have come out and become more public. And I've talked about this story before. We really need to focus on this agency. It's just thoroughly gone, completely corrupted, comprehensively. It really just needs a deep dive investigation and a major house cleaning, especially because they are actively killing people by handing out commercial driver's licenses to people who drive around the country and then, of course, can't speak English, don't know how to drive, and they cause terrible accidents like the one that's pictured here down in Florida. You may think you've left Washington State. That doesn't mean Washington State can't come and find you wherever you live. But regardless, the Department of Licensing has a massive amount of corruption internally that just needs to be exposed and cleaned up. And we've barely begun to see, I think, the tip of that iceberg. And nevertheless, this story that came out of the Department of Justice in their Spokane office, I think, was relevant. And it's just a quick reminder that there's multiple investigations going on. And Washington State agencies are, of course, the target of many of those investigations. So let's move on to story number 4. This story really, I want to talk about a series of videos that Brandy Cruz did right before Thanksgiving. I think these stories are really important, and it had to do with a mole inside the teachers union who went to, and this is the Washington Education Union Association, WEA. You'll hear us reference that as WEA sometimes. And this was actually an important series of videos that she did here about, and played this recording from their Zoom meeting. and how completely insane and dishonest and idiotic they are, and corrupt, of course, and how they just use these opportunities to spread egregious misinformation that anybody who has any experience in this world would know that they're being lied to here. But of course, these are teachers and they're union members, so they swallow everything and believe it, except for apparently at least one of them who recorded it and shared it with Brandy Cruz. Brandy Cruz did a great job on these videos. I'm going to link them down below. You should watch them. Most importantly, listen for yourself to see just completely how uneducated these people really are and how horrific their viewpoints are when it comes to their views of your kids in public school and, of course, parents. Now, the big thing about this is the reason that they had this conference call was, of course, they're overreacting and making a big deal out of the Let's Go Washington initiatives about protecting girls' sports and also restoring parent transparency for parents so they can actually know what's going on in school. And if there's one thing the teachers union, apparently, according to their own statements, that they don't want is parents to have any access to any information about what they're doing to their kids when the parents aren't around. It is a bizarre conference call. Some of these people who pretend to be educated, and you listen to what they say, it's kind of shocking. It's amazing that these people actually pretend to be educators. I have no idea if they really are, or if they're just lying, or if they even have the degrees that they pretend that they have, but they certainly don't sound like it. And what they do sound like is a lot of hardcore political leftists trying to figure out how they can hold on to their abuse of power and how they can spend all their money that they get from teachers. They extract this money from teachers so they can make sure they can keep secrets from parents and still continue to do whatever it is they're doing to your kids when they don't want you to know. And of course, they want to stop and oppose the Let's Go Washington initiatives, which is why you should sign both of them and get them signed by everybody you know. Now, listen, I've had a lot of conflicts with the Washington Education Association before. Obviously, this is their logo here. It's highly deceptive because they don't care about knowledge at all, especially the more ignorant the kids are and the worse they do on test scores, the more the WEA wants you to pay them so that they can continue to destroy the educational future of more generations. What they do care about, though, is their political agenda, and they want to make sure they shove that right down your kid's throat at every opportunity, as they completely revealed in this whistleblower video that they probably didn't want you to hear. When we talk about the Washington State Office Superintendent of Public Instruction, Chris Reichdel's Temple of Educational Doom, he couldn't build this temple and destroy your children's future without the aggressive and consistent help of the Washington Education Association, because they essentially control him. He's their puppet, and together they can build temples of chaos and destruction for your children. What they won't do is help educate your kids in any way at all. Moving on to story number 3. Story number 3 is, and I've had people ask me this question, how many taxpayers move out of Washington State? This is a good question. I've brought this up before. Somebody recently asked me this on a live stream, and I didn't know the answer. So fortunately for me, though, that answer recently came out. I'm going to clarify that this is having to do with how many taxpayers have left generically. And let's get into this story because I found this to be pretty interesting. Fortunately for us, there was, right after this person had asked me this question, I didn't know the answer, there was an interstate migration study just done by the National Taxpayers Union Foundation, mostly using IRS data. And you can look at their methodology. I'll link to that article down below. And they're basically analyzing every state in America for how many people are leaving versus how many people are coming, because some people are leaving and going to other states. This is actually the basic map that they have there. It's an interactive map. You can click on each one and find out what's happening in every state. The blue states are the states in this map that people are moving into, and the red states are states that people are moving out of. However, the velocity of that movement is pretty interesting. California, of course, has a taxpayer leaving every single minute. In Florida, they have taxpayers arriving every couple minutes or so. Texas is a little bit behind them on that rate, that velocity of taxpayer movement. You also see red and blue states in both categories here. Even though Utah shows that they have somebody moving into their state, on average, the net difference, it really is it's a little over a day. So it's like a day and a certain number of hours for a new person to come into Utah. So that's pretty close to stasis. But nevertheless, there's a net gain in Utah. But it's an interesting map. For those of you who are wonkish and stuff, I like digging into this stuff. And it turns out that in Washington State, we're not looking good in comparison to a lot of these other states. Although we're worse than Oregon, and we're not as bad as California, and we're not as bad as Illinois or New York. and other states too. But we lose a taxpayer every 30 minutes, or 29 minutes and 55 seconds to be exact, according to IRS data, because who knows if that's very accurate, but at least it gives us something to work on based on some kind of a metric. And I believe that the National Taxpayers Union does this every year. Now, of course, most of the people that are leaving Washington State, there are people moving into Washington State at the same time, but the ones who are leaving are generally the ones trying to run away from the socialists because they don't want to have their lives ruined, and especially if they're trying to leave Seattle or a place that's turned itself into a socialist experiment, maybe like Spokane. So that's what's going on. That's a story you might have missed. Let's move on to story number 2. Story number 2 has to do with our ferry systems. And honestly, here's something that really surprised me. The Seattle Times really appears to have accidentally committed an act of journalism, and somehow somebody's been honest there in talking about how the ferry system in Washington State can't actually afford to go hybrid with the current fleet. This is amazing because the Seattle Times is usually just a cheerleader for everything stupid the government does and whatever the Democrats tell them to report. So I don't know if somebody was just gone from their office over the Thanksgiving week and there were enough of the crazy editors that were on vacation, and so somebody slipped in a story about that somehow slipped through that doesn't fit the narrative that the Washington State government wants you to have. But Seattle Times both did an article and they actually did a editorial on this subject, and I'll try to link to those down below. But it's amazing that they're actually waking up and recognizing the disaster of the stupidity of the hybrid approach to the ferry design. It's a good way to spend and squander a lot of money and make sure that you don't have reliable ferries in the system. Because as we've seen, the current green ferry, and I'll put that in air quotes, it isn't green at all, of course. It does, unless you count the amount of money it's wasted on it. But of course, it keeps breaking down constantly after just a month of time. I mean, it's ridiculous, and it is embarrassing. Obviously, in real modern countries, you don't destroy yourself by imposing stupid ferry designs that have no chance of success and won't work. But in Washington State, virtue signaling is more important than reality, and so that's why we're using ferries that won't work, and they keep on having to be pulled out. Of course, we've been promised ferries that look like this. This is according to the fake design plans that they put out there, and it turns out that despite the fact that Washington State and Puget Sound specifically, having one of the greatest ports in the world and a long and significant history of shipbuilding for over 100 years. Of course, they aren't going to build it locally. They're going to go to Florida because Washington State's decided to make it so difficult to build ships in Washington that you have to go somewhere else to build them, even for our own ferries. Now, that is ridiculous enough by itself, but of course, now that since we're going to have to go to Florida, it looks like we're going to have to wait a lot longer. It's questionable as to how many people watching this video will even be alive by the time these ferries get delivered. We'll soon find out. Of course, Bob Ferguson and former Governor Inslee, they didn't care. They had a cool press conference where they were able to announce the new awesome, fancy hybrid ferry that'll never be delivered and the new contract for ferries that they have to get from Florida. And it probably looked good. It was a good backdrop of the ferry, and they got to be outside. Of course, they also agreed in that same meeting that they're going to blame Trump for every one of their failures, Inslee in particular, because he's handed off his failures to Ferguson, who plans to double down on dumb, but they both have to have an agreed upon scapegoat. Trump certainly fits that bill. All right, let's move on to the story number 1 that you might have missed over this last weekend. No, I don't think you actually missed this story because you would have to have been completely disconnected from all media to not be aware that we had an Afghan refugee who was moved conveniently to Bellingham, Washington, and who decided that the most important thing to do in his life was to drive all the way across the country and basically shoot and kill at least one National Guardsman. Now, listen, I don't think you missed this story because this story was everywhere. We know about the guy who lived in Bellingham here, the Afghan that was brought out under the Refugee program, and who apparently developed his craziness while he was in Bellingham, and then he went out and murdered the National Guard woman down there and then wounded the other airman there who's hopefully recovering in the hospital as I record this video right now. Now, what you don't know, what the part of that story I don't think has been reported, is that the Whatcom County Council has had multiple presentations over the years, most recently here in 2021, and this is actually the cover of that presentation here, called The Refugee Resettlement in Whatcom County, and this was presented to them during the Biden administration, during the first year of the Biden administration. Shortly after that presentation, we had Biden's disastrous Afghan withdrawal fiasco where Americans died, Afghans died, the whole country kind of fell apart. apart, and you had plane loads of people like this that they wanted to bring into Bellingham and Washington State. Now, when you look back on this presentation, of course, they wanted to explain to the Whatcom County Council just how this refugee resettlement happens. And so they had great graphics like this showing that this is what happens. These poor people, they go through the UN, State Department supposedly vets them, and then they throw them to the wind, and a whole bunch of them are going to end up here. One of the things I want to point out here that's pretty interesting is that in this presentation, even back then in 2021, they pointed out that Washington State was the second most likely destination of any refugee coming to America. It was coming to Washington State, despite the fact that we are not the second largest state. So we have a disproportionate number of these unvetted refugees that have landed in our state, and these guys were pretty proud of it when they were presenting this to the Whatcom County Council. And they pitch it, of course, with these cool graphics here about their first hours, temporary housing, their first few days, how they get free housing and free food and free medical scanning and social services and all the good stuff the taxpayers are funding through the nose to make sure that they have a good time as they prepare for their next stages in America. Of course, this is how they pitch the cost of resettlement down below, but as we've seen, that extensive vetting is pretty much useless, and the real cost of resettlement can be much, much worse than what was pitched to the Whatcom County Council just a couple years ago. Now, at the same time, after that story came out, and this is less reported in local media, but it is more reported around the country because, of course, our local media is not going to report on, for instance, the two people who decided to host the future jihadi at their house when he first came over from Afghanistan. And it was a kind of an odd thing because, of course, they're super rich, very liberal people. They had a multi-million-dollar home. They basically still ran kind of a virtue signaling GoFundMe, raised about $10,000 for this Afghan, the future shooter and his family. They did donate to Hillary Clinton and Kamala Harris and John Ossoff, who's basically the senator, the perpetual candidate that the Democrats have down in Texas. And of course, Act Blue took a lot of their money too. So they were known nationally as leftists. They supported leftists, and of course, they also supported this Afghan. One of the things to remember about this whole story when you really look at it is that there's a lot of people that have been unvetted and come to Washington State from other countries. Obviously, some of them are not going to go out and blow things up or kill people, but there's a large number, unfortunately, that were probably unvetted, and a disproportionate number of them do live in Washington State based on all the available data that we're able to see, not just this information that was pitched to the Whatcom County Council. I think that's a story that's underreported. We need to talk more about it. I'll probably do so soon, but it is important for people to be aware. Now, as we move on past that, if this hasn't increased your blood pressure and made you super happy about what's going on in the world around you, I decided to spend some time this weekend going around and seeing Lake Cushman right here. Went out to the Big Creek Campground, did a small hike out there with my wife. I've been out there before with my kids. It's just kind of fun to go out there. There's nothing more relaxing than being out in the Olympic Forest and a nice foggy day in the rainforest on a nice hike. On the way back, I did stop by my Uncle Ed Dalby's old water wheel. It's been relocated to where it's at now, but nevertheless, it's been there for about 100 years, and it was just fun. I did a little video. If you haven't seen that, feel free to go to that down below. Just a video about that experience. I'm trying to do more stories about traveling around Washington State because it's not all the bad news of politics. It's a beautiful state with a lot of amazing things and a lot of amazing people who live here. Just our politicians aren't amazing. They're just horrible. So with that, being involved in what's going on in Washington State is important because you do need to show up if you want to change the types of stories that you're going to be missing on weekends like this. But to do that, you have to be willing to show up because, as I always say, the future belongs to those who show up.